Have you ever wondered why you believe the things you do, or why your parents believe what they do? The answer, if you've been paying close attention this semester, is of course rhetoric. Welcome to the COM 300 module on ideological criticism. Our objectives are first to assemble a vocabulary that will enable critical work on how rhetoric constructs and deconstructs beliefs and belief systems. Second, to outline procedures that will empower an ideological analysis of a rhetorical artifact. And third, to compare and contrast artifacts that struggle over and contest a central belief system in America. As always, our working vocabulary is available to double check on the test. How do we define ideology? Well, an ideology is a belief system. So Foss sees it as a pattern of beliefs that determines a group's interpretation of some aspect of the world. Sort of a mental framework with language and concepts and everything, a belief system, imagery, and how we represent things. Examples, of course, are more formal, like patriotism, ta-da! Or anti-communism, or Christianity, or multiculturalism, those kinds of conservatism, liberalism, larger kinds of belief systems like that. But it can also be something more informal, like the idea of the American dream, and that anyone could be a pop star in America, right? So there are other kinds of belief systems. The important thing there is that it's not an individual belief that we're talking about, not what you believe. Those are important, but what we're focused here on are group beliefs and how beliefs become sort of larger or shrink over time. What are some of the key topics that we look at? Well, you can study the membership and who's in it and what they do. You can study their core beliefs or their goals, any particular defining events or recurring events that they have, the idea of a sacred text, something that they fundamentally believe in, or is it an ultimate authority? What is going to be the ultimate voice on something like that? The values and norms, group positions, resources, etc. You can look at a lot of things when you analyze ideology. For terminology, let's start with hegemony. Hegemony is when one particular belief system becomes more dominant. That is, it gains power. It can map or classify the belief systems for others, right? One example, before the Iraq War, between the president and the cabinet and the religious leaders and many of the politicians, they constructed a particular hegemonic belief. Colin Powell was instrumental in some of this, and that belief led us into war, right? Very powerful. U.S. is a hegemonic superpower. We use that term because a belief, obviously it's a very dominant kind of a power across the world, but also a belief in democracy is a hegemonic belief system in America, right? It's dominant. How do belief systems become dominant? Well, they become legitimized, and that's our next term, legitimation, where a belief becomes reinforced or defended, or we see important people that hold that belief, people we respect, or we see a lot of people holding a belief, right? So this is the rhetorical strategies and tactics that are used to make a belief system particularly powerful or dominant. Strength, morality, correctness, history, ideals, symbols, all of these are variously invoked to legitimize a certain belief system. I mentioned the example of Colin Powell speaking at the UN before the Iraq War. Naturalization. Once a belief system is legitimized, it becomes so natural, not all of them, but some of them become so natural that it doesn't seem like a belief system. It's not like we see things in a certain way because that way is the way we see things, right? So there's a number of examples of how things become naturalized and unquestioned. The Western medicine model, for example, emphasizes taking medicine or doing surgery. So we come to expect over time that when we feel sick and go to a doctor, that we're going to get some medications that will make us feel better, or there's going to be some need for surgery, right? So that's a large construct, but it is a sort of a naturalized belief system. You're bald, take a pill. Erectile dysfunction, take a pill, right? So another naturalized belief is that competition means a strong economy and that a free market is the best way to ensure competition, right? So interesting ideological belief, and we struggle with some of that at the presidential level. We pledge allegiance to the flag as a naturalized belief that we may not question, but we just pledge it, right? Marginalization is when a group that is not dominant is pushed to the sides. Their rhetoric is either silenced or in some way oppressed, discarded, identified as somehow unacceptable because it's sinful or it's corrupt or it's liberal or it's immoral or whatever. And that means that, like on a page, those voices are pushed to the margin, right? They're not the central things happening. One example is, of course, religion in the United States. The 70% about are Christian, which makes non-Christian at about 5.9% or 6%, and other at about 1.5%, with unaffiliated at 23% and don't know in there somewhere, right? But also that clearly indicates that at some level there's going to be a level of marginalization for some of these non-Christian religions, right? And we do see that over time. False consciousness. False consciousness is essentially how the system the system of exploitation is able to perpetuate itself, because it convinces the people that, hey, this is a great system, and you have lots of chances, and things are going really rosy here. And that kind of keeps you from thinking, wow, I'm really screwed, right? So that's what false consciousness is. So that it's a kind of a subtle propaganda, and oftentimes, even if we disagree with a dominant ideology, it's hard to avoid it. It's all over the media. It comes to us through going to education. Sometimes it comes to us through reading habits, through shopping. And so it's hard to avoid getting some of this propaganda, even if we don't believe in it. Let's look at the procedures then that Foss identifies and use the example of the Humana building. First, we identify presented elements. What's in the actual artifact? What are the arguments, the evidence, the terms, the metaphors, the shapes, the lines, the colors? What's in the artifact, okay? And then second, we identify the suggested elements. What do we think these mean? What are they might be connected to? How do we interpret them? What's suggested to us? And then on the basis of the suggested elements, then we start formulating an ideology. Let's talk about this. So when we look at the Humana building, we see that it's granite, it's massive, it has an L shape, it's got a pyramid shape at the top. When you walk in, there's water flowing down either side of the entrance. The lines are crossed in various places. The marble floor shows geometric shapes. There's lots of works of art, very extravagant. Wood is highly polished and ornate, and there's a rotunda of 6 marble columns in the building. Well, what does it suggest? Well, Foss says it suggests granite is permanence, it's wealth. The scale is sort of awesome and evokes grandeur. The L shape could be a tombstone, could be a memorial of some kind, also maybe a cash register. The water often signifies purification or cleanliness. Cross lines are crosses. The lobby indicates wealth and grandeur with all of the fine works of wood and everything. The rotunda evokes a tomb or a mausoleum. Again, the expensive wood kind of looks like an expensive or a fancy coffin. And all of the works of art then signify wealth or treasure. Well, where does that lead us then? It leads us toward identifying or formulating an ideology based on what's suggested. And so if we look at the different suggested elements, we can group them into two particular areas. That is, we can identify a couple of frames that we can look at. The first they identify as death. The granite, the marble tombstone, the crosses, the pyramid is kind of tomb-like at the top. The inner rotunda has the sanctity and quiet of a mausoleum or a tomb. The water purifies the dead. We can get a lot of associations there. And of course, the other major category here is that the materials are very expensive, that the artworks are very valuable, that there's an elegance, that there's a cash register shape. So we're getting a clear wealth here. To help us, Foss talks a little bit about how we formulate this ideology and the kinds of questions that we ask ourselves. So we can ask, well, looking at suggested elements, what characteristics or roles or actions or ways of seeing does the artifact command or invite? What values are suggested? What are some things that the artifact doesn't want people to think about, right? So you can take a lot of those kinds of questions and begin to get at, what is the ideology behind this? And as she also identifies, you look for key clusters or you look for emergent themes, and we've seen here death and wealth are the emergent themes that come about. And then as you write this, you talk a little bit about the implications of that emerging ideological theme, so that here we're eulogizing death and emphasizing and extracting wealth. Of course, if you had to guess, the main occupants of that building are insurance and medical offices, right? So let's talk about Ndiaye's critique of UN websites. The United Nations is a global forum to help solve global problems. UNAIDS, UNFPA on population, and UNICEF on children are agencies that rally to unite together and fight large problems. The question Ndiaye asks is, do they practice what they preach? She goes to their websites and observes at UNICEF images of children collecting money in the West for Halloween, during Halloween, sad children in the third world, alone and together. For UNFPA, there's key issues, global reach, and the executive board, and also the latest news with information about the population projects. And for UNAIDS, there's no pictures, but the latest news of projects, what's new with HIV topics, upcoming events elsewhere on the web, and linkages and so forth. She sees the surface ideology as working for the world with openness and action. But the deep ideology that Ndiaye finds is that first, these people are presented as victims, not equal partners, while the smiling children from the West who are collecting money seem very happy. The children in the third world and other places are sad, and they're using the pity appeal to try and get people to contribute and be a part of it. Second is that there's a hierarchy of the helper and the helped. So that means that all the stories about self-help, well, those are in the back pages, right? Here it's all about the agency helping the other. So we're the good, we're the helpers, and you're the pitiable people who need to be helped. And then finally, the news is really more of a tool to serve the interests of the agencies. So we get, here we're launching this plan, we're doing this project, we're focusing on this shining example of something, rather than saying, hey, there's some people here who need this, or we're trying to get an action together on this, sharing important information and resources. So from her view, the deep ideology is not inclusive of the global community. Gilmore's critique of Jiang's speech on the handover of Hong Kong identifies that first, these are three tenets of the ideology within the speech. First, that the Hong Kong is weak and needs saving. Right? China will help you survive the vicissitudes. Okay. Second, that Hong Kong needs assistance and that they will be on their road to recovery and the world will be watching while China saves Hong Kong. And third, that the PRC is strong, that Hong Kong will return to the motherland, which is a creative, forward-thinking, and diplomatic system which will implement one country, two systems, and they will enjoy rights and freedoms under that system. Needless to say, Gilmore's deep ideology is kind of critical because this is basically a constructed ideology that they needed to be saved from a problem or problems that really didn't exist. Hong Kong had survived just fine for 150 years, and Jiang sort of actually reverses the role of Hong Kong and China because Hong Kong was a real financial and cultural hub, and it's China that's kind of playing catch up. So in some senses, there's a clear underlying or deep ideology here underneath the, we need to save our poor neighbors in Hong Kong. Post this. What do you think is happening to ideology and to belief systems in the age of social media? Do you think we have more cultural false consciousness? Do you think that we have more hegemony, more dominance, or more fragmentation of belief systems? What's going on in social media? You may have discovered that rhetoric is important in many, many ways. It's not that your beliefs are wrong. It's that you should know, moving forward in life, that there are very powerful forces that are using rhetoric and using persuasion to change what you believe and how you believe it. As long as you're aware of that and are making conscious choices, then you should be okay. So, have a great day and have a great life.